7 times, Mason Holt walked right through the polished doors at Cross Freight, holding his pitch folder tight, keeping his head held high. 7 times the receptionist picked up her phone to call the executive suite. 7 times the answer came back, no thanks, but he never argued. He just took his folder, drove home to his daughter, and slept peacefully. Then came day 8, and Mason was no longer the one asking for favors. This time Evelyn Cross stood at his wooden fence, her face completely pale, desperately holding a $12 million shipping contract facing total collapse. Let us ask, how does a man rejected 7 times become her ultimate savior? Keep listening to find out. It was a Friday afternoon in a quiet community where people still fixed things instead of replacing them. The massive oak tree on Mason's lawn had a heavy branch, cracked since spring. He skipped calling a tree service, fully planning to do the repair work himself. He sat quietly on his front porch steps, holding some reflective tape and a purple backpack, carefully adding safety strips to the shoulder straps before Bonnie started her very first week of school. His young daughter sat right beside him, hugging her stuffed bunny. She squeezed her gray lop-eared bunny named Turnip tightly, though she completely forgot why she even chose that name. She watched her dad work with the intense focus of someone admiring quiet competence. The street remained completely quiet, except for the fading noise of a distant lawnmower and the occasional metallic clang from the nearby auto shop. Mason smoothed down the final piece of tape, holding the backpack up to the late sun to check his work. Just then, a sleek black Mercedes pulled up smoothly right beside their curb. It parked with the quiet precision of a luxury car used to making a grand entrance. And the powerful woman who stepped out looked exactly like her glossy portrait in the local business quarterly last April. She wore a charcoal blazer, dark slacks, and her hair was tied back tightly. Evelyn Cross, the formidable chief executive officer of Cross Freight Solutions, the third largest regional logistics and shipping company in the entire Midwest. Her name constantly appeared in industry magazines alongside words like relentless, exacting, and formidable. She looked every bit of those tough descriptions standing on Mason's cracked front sidewalk. But she also looked, beneath that tough corporate exterior, like a panicked boss who had not slept in 2 full days. Bonnie stared at this stranger with the exact same focus she used for difficult puzzles she could not solve. Then she leaned in close to her dad and whispered, using a voice that was not exactly a quiet whisper, that this lady looked like her teacher the morning she lost all the spelling tests. Mason did not crack a smile. He stood up slowly, set the backpack down, and just waited. Evelyn Cross walked straight to his wooden fence and stopped. She had practiced her pitch during the 40-minute drive from her downtown office. But somewhere near the highway interchange, all of those corporate talking points completely fell apart. This is where the tables turned. She was left with the raw truth of why she came, something she absolutely hated admitting. She locked eyes with the very man she rejected, standing quietly behind his fence. He wore a faded work shirt, dusty boots, holding a roll of tape in his hand. And she finally saw it. The man she once rejected now held all the power. Looking at her now, I realized she had never actually seen me before. Not once during those 7 rejections, all those meetings and calls. Now she was begging for my fleet of 11 trucks by Monday morning. I quietly held her desperate gaze for 3 full seconds. Just long enough to let the weight of those 7 rejections sink in. Then I simply unlatched my gate, invited her inside, and let her explain what was falling apart. To truly grasp what the mighty Evelyn Cross was begging for, you and I need to look back at the beginning, not this crisis. Back to when I first stood in their lobby, believing I stood a chance. Hoping, quite reasonably, that my transport paperwork was in order. That was 18 months before she ended up begging on my front porch. I had just registered my 9th rig, expanding my small fleet, bringing Holt Logistics to the point where we were ready for big commercial contracts. I prepped that application myself, verified every certification, and filed it through official channels. The rejection came within a week, with a lazy scribble in the notes. Your fleet size does not meet our minimum threshold. I called them directly to ask what that threshold actually was. The representative on the line had absolutely no answers for me. No such limit existed on their corporate website or in their documentation. I did not argue, I just filed that note in my truck's notebook. Then I quietly prepped application number 2 14 months before our roles reversed. I resubmitted everything, this time adding a full commercial insurance certificate, spotless driving records for my operators, plus fully updated safety forms. That second rejection claimed we lacked cold chain transport experience. My startup did not specialize in refrigerated cargo yet, but more importantly, neither did the primary shipping contracts Cross Freight actually handled then. Even Evelyn's own executive assistant, Giselle, admitted she hesitated when pulling my rejection letter from the outbox, looking for some logic before deciding it was not her place. 11 months out, I completed our cold chain training and installed temperature monitoring equipment across my entire fleet. The third rejection blamed my supposedly weak commercial credit history. 9 months out, I walked in carrying 3 years of financials and 2 solid regional contracts. That afternoon, Evelyn Cross actually met with me face to face, just 5 minutes inside the small glass conference room upstairs. She coldly scanned my application file. Then she sized me up, noticing my frayed collar, rough hands, and boots that had been patched up. She coldly promised to review my logistics proposal and let me know. A week later, the email arrived. After careful consideration, the answer was no, without any real explanation listed anywhere in the message. Stick with me here. 6 months before Friday, I applied again with strong broker recommendations and a revised operations plan. The latest rejection was emailed back that exact same day. They suddenly claimed a new policy prioritizing partners with 15 units or more. A fake rule designed to keep me out, but I just let my success do the talking. That convenient excuse was just the formal reason on my 6th rejection letter. 3 months later, my shipping fleet hit 11 trucks. I pitched them again. Giselle reviewed my logistics file before it even reached Evelyn's desk. She carried my contract upstairs, slapping a bright note on the cover page that said, in her neat handwriting, that my logistics portfolio beat all their current active partners. But Evelyn just peeled that note right off. She tossed it aside and signed yet another rejection for me. Just 6 weeks before that fateful Friday, I drove straight to Cross Freight unannounced, standing in their main lobby for 2.5 hours. Evelyn marched past me to a meeting. Our eyes locked for 3 seconds before she brushed me off and hit the elevator. Sure enough, that same evening, another automated rejection landed in my inbox, stating that Cross Freight was not taking new contractor applications for this quarter. But here is exactly what Evelyn Cross missed during all 7 of those dismissive encounters. My actual professional history. You and I are about to look at my secret playbook. I had already spent 12 years grinding in supply chain management at Meridian before buying my first truck. I started as a route analyst fresh out of college, grinding my way up into logistics operations management. By my mid-30s, I was running the show as operations director for the entire Midwest division. I oversaw a trucking fleet of 430 transport vehicles across 9 states. I negotiated high-level supply chain contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars and engineered the exact routing architecture, giving Meridian a massive competitive advantage that none of our regional rivals could touch for nearly a decade. I knew the freight transportation industry completely from the inside out, from daily freight manifests to high-level board meetings, and I walked away from it entirely voluntarily. I left because my wife passed away and my little girl was only 3 years old. She deserved to grow up with a real backyard, near a grandmother who still remembered her mother's face. Claire grew up in Millhaven, where all her family was still right there. So I moved into that quiet house with the cracked oak branch and rusty chain link fence. I bought my first rig with the very last of my severance check, and I started over in the smallest, quietest way I knew how. My good friend Isaac Rhodes had known me ever since college. Isaac ran a truck stop diner 12 miles east of town, watching me slowly rebuild my life, one transport vehicle at a time. He never mentioned Meridian to anyone, unless I brought the subject up first. Isaac fully understood what I traded away and why. He respected my choice, never making it a weird subject of sentiment or sad mourning. That was honestly one of the biggest reasons I kept coming back to his diner. He kept the black coffee hot and that corner booth always open. Whenever I rolled in after a grueling night run, looking like I desperately needed to think out loud, Isaac just poured my mug, listened closely, and kept his thoughts to himself unless I asked. That little house on Crestfield Lane was the perfect size for a father and daughter learning to navigate our daily routines together. I kept it incredibly neat, applying the disciplined minimalism of a guy who once managed 400 vehicles. I fully understood that logistics chaos compounds if you ignore it. I fixed things around there myself, the back fence latch, our leaky kitchen faucet, even that massive cracked oak branch that finally crashed down during July, which I chopped and stacked into firewood myself. Today's rejection is just tomorrow's opportunity. My daughter Bonnie could no longer remember her mother's voice. Yet she kept old photos lined up on our bookshelf, right next to a small cedar box from her grandparents. Inside lay a delicate pressed flower, a tiny handwritten note, and a photograph of my late wife Claire looking just like Bonnie does now. Anyone who saw them together immediately noticed the striking resemblance. Bonnie even mirrored my exact expression whenever I stared at Claire's picture on the wall. A heavy, quiet stillness, not exactly grief. More like the lingering shadow of a bright light that once filled our home, and whose absence was only truly felt when the shadows shifted during certain hours of the afternoon. We still had Turnip, the dog Claire ordered from a catalog weeks before the fatal crash. My daughter had no real idea what I did before I started Millhaven. She just saw me scan business contracts, toss them on the table, and tell her everything was fine. One afternoon, she honestly asked me if fine meant something good or bad. I explained that it meant I was planning, and building a strategy is completely different from worrying. It was a vital distinction I wanted her to always remember. But what I was actually calculating for 6 solid months, the real reason I kept pitching my fleet to Crossfreight despite being rejected constantly, was a massive upcoming contract that had not even been signed when I first walked inside. I already knew that Retail Corp planned to launch a massive Midwest distribution bid in the 4th quarter. I actually designed their original supply chain playbook 8 years ago, back during my time at Meridian. I understood their procurement process inside out, knowing exactly which trucking fleets fit their regional profile. And I knew exactly why Crossfreight was absolutely guaranteed to secure that deal. But I also knew this. CEO Evelyn Cross had a fatal routing flaw up north that would not hurt her during the slow season, but it would trigger a creepily massive bottleneck under the intense weight a 90-day holiday shipping rush would inevitably bring. You might think 7 rejections meant defeat, but I was not begging for her leftovers. I just needed my logistics fleet fully approved and ready before that major contract landed. That way, when her minor oversight inevitably turned into an absolute disaster, I would already be at the table, legally authorized to rescue her entire operation. With a proven track record they could easily verify. I did not expect her to reject me so fiercely, but my strategy was completely bulletproof. Crossfreight Solutions secured that massive Retail Corp deal weeks ago, a cool $12 million. 87 delivery points scattered across the entire Midwest. Their first major deadline was set for 90 days, right during the first week of November, when the entire holiday inventory rush had to be fully up and running. Evelyn proudly signed that massive multi-million-dollar agreement herself. That exact same week, she also signed my 7th consecutive fleet rejection letter. She dismissed me with the ultimate confidence of a leader who pulled her logistics firm from near bankruptcy to regional dominance with sheer discipline. To be honest, she had earned that confidence. But stick with me here. The real threat was always Carter Baines. Carter sat on their board of directors long before Evelyn ever took over the logistics empire. Her father had appointed him during those early years, back when the old man believed in keeping his worst enemies close enough to watch. As it turned out, Baines never respected Evelyn as a leader. He spent 7 years waiting for her to trip up, planning to force a massive board vote. When patience ran thin, he just manufactured a mistake. Everything finally went down on a Wednesday. Her entire fleet of 22 trucks suddenly walked out during a bitter regional labor dispute. That timing was definitely no accident. Baines had deep, old ties to that union leadership long before joining her board. He timed that strike to hit right when her logistics company was at its weakest. They were 8 weeks into a $12 million rollout, too late to exit with 0 drivers. Evelyn spent that entire Wednesday and Thursday frantic, begging every single backup transport partner in the regional directory. The local market was completely dry. Those weeks right before Thanksgiving are the busiest, tightest days on the entire shipping calendar, and any trucking business with reliable rigs was already fully booked. I heard her operations director ran the numbers 3 times. They could only cover about 60% of their main retail deliveries with internal resources, even after scraping together help from smaller affiliates. 60% was a failure. It meant a material breach, a default on a $12 million contract, fully documented in their board files. It proved she had bypassed the standard partner list, which would serve as the perfect weapon Carter Baines desperately needed to force that board vote. Finally, her assistant Giselle brought up my name. She pulled my rejected file from the archives, my 6th attempt, old sticky note attached, and silently dropped it on Evelyn's desk. Evelyn just sat there, staring at my folder for a long time. Then, her voice losing its usual confident edge, she asked why she had rejected my company. Giselle did not answer her right away. When she finally spoke, she quietly suggested none of those 7 official reasons were the actual truth. Evelyn was forced to sit with that harsh reality. She likely replayed our 5-minute meeting inside that cramped glass conference room. My frayed collar, my worn-out boots, until she finally recognized, with brutal clarity, the exact moment she had judged me and made her decision. She had not rejected me because of anything in my file. She dismissed me the second she looked at me, and she knew exactly what that meant. She had spent her entire career fighting the assumption that her own business skills were defined by her looks. Yet she turned right around and did the exact same thing to me across that table. Ignoring my perfect safety record and 7 long years of grinding she never even bothered to ask about. Naturally, she did not say a single word of this out loud. She simply closed my folder, told Giselle to find my address, and grabbed her car keys. My kitchen was tiny but clean, the way a home looks when a single dad handles everything himself. There was a modest dish rack sitting on the four counter, holding just 2 plates and my daughter's cereal bowl. My daughter's crayon drawing was stuck to the fridge with a cheap magnet shaped like the state of Iowa. And by the window, a framed picture of my late wife, showing those bright eyes and my daughter's exact smile. Now Evelyn sat right at my humble kitchen table, while I poured coffee, setting down 2 mugs to review the desperate plea she had brought to my door. I read every word carefully, not just skimming the pages. I scanned those complex footnotes with the sharp focus of someone who knows exactly what to find in a logistics contract. She noticed my focus and remained silent. I asked for the exact completion percentage she required to avoid breaching her contract. She told me 85%. I said, 11 trucks on 3 rotating shifts will cover 90%, assuming you grant me total routing authority. She demanded her own cross-freight supervisors ride in every truck for monitoring. I replied, no, the live tracking on my platform offers far more transparency than any physical passenger, plus the unnecessary wait would only delay our tight delivery schedule. You and I know the power of being right. I wasn't being rude, just correct, and we both knew it. She quietly asked where I had learned to manage logistics. I mentioned the University of Iowa, majoring in industrial engineering and business administration, along with 12 solid years of hard operational experience. She asked where I had gained that experience. I looked her in the eyes before speaking, not out of hesitation, but to give her question real weight. I simply replied, Meridian Logistics. That name hit the room hard. You and I both know how a single truth can instantly shift the balance of power. Her company, Cross Freight, once applied to become a regional subcontractor for Meridian. That was exactly 7 years ago, just before she fought to stabilize the company after her father passed away. My old company had flatly rejected them. The rejection cited her small fleet, and I could tell she still remembered that letter. She had probably read it a dozen times, feeling the sting of being told her business wasn't good enough. She quietly asked what my title was back then. I answered, Director of Operations for the entire Midwest Division. She slowly placed her coffee cup back on the table. My daughter Bonnie looked up from her drawing, proudly telling her that I used to be a massive boss. But she added that it kept me away from home too much, before calmly returning to her drawing. I watched my little girl, feeling zero regret and offering absolutely no excuses for my choices. Evelyn quietly offered an apology for rejecting my own fleet 7 times. I calmly assured her that no apology was necessary. She was entirely within her rights to decline my fleet for whatever reason. I told her my only focus was whether she could commit to an actual partnership this time. Not just a desperate crisis transaction, but a professional alliance built on absolute transparency. I told her I simply needed the night to make my decision. She quietly gathered her files, stood up and scanned my kitchen one last time before leaving. She stared at the old photo on my wall far longer than she intended. Through the window, I watched her sit silently in her car for a full minute before starting the engine. I stepped onto the driveway and called Isaac, while Bonnie's grandmother watched TV inside. The clock was already nearing 9 p.m. Isaac was closing up his diner, wiping the counter and shutting down the grill. He listened to my whole story about the meeting without saying a word. He set down his dish towel, leaning against the counter with the quiet, intense focus of someone giving your words his absolute, undivided attention. When I finished, Isaac asked the question you are probably wondering now. Would I finally sign? Sitting on my truck's tailgate, I stared up at that old, cracked oak branch. Looking at the sky, I finally knew how to explain what I'd carried for 18 months. I told Isaac the straight truth. That massive retail core contract was always my ultimate goal. I'd spotted the glaring structural flaws in Evelyn's logistics plan 6 months before she ever signed it. My supply chain experience warned me her delivery schedule would absolutely crush the entire network. That's exactly why I kept trying to get my fleet credentialed with Crossfreight. I wanted to be ready to step in on my terms when her broken system finally collapsed. To be honest, I never expected a driver strike to be the final breaking point. But my core business logic was rock solid from day one, and it proved itself now. Isaac just stared. You knew this was coming? I shook my head. Not this exactly, but something close. I've run supply chains long enough to know flawed systems don't stay theoretical. Once you drop real, heavy freight loads on them, they shatter. We both know the only real mystery is exactly when and how. Isaac leaned back, staring up at the ceiling of that quiet diner for a moment. Then he asked if I ever got genuinely angry about Evelyn's 7 brutal rejections. Like actually furious, not just pretending to shrug it off to be polite. I looked back up at that old branch. I told him yes at first, but grudges burn too much mental fuel you need to build your own quiet success. Look, you and I both know I've sat on her side of that corporate table before. I'd stamped rejections on perfectly solid carrier applications for reasons that were more about their vibe walking into my office than the hard metrics on their paperwork. I knew exactly how that game looked from both sides of the desk. I refused to waste energy being bitter over a cold business decision I'd made myself. So I decided to sign, but on my terms now, not hers. I walked inside and sat down at the small, cluttered desk in my living room. And I drafted 3 pages of strict supplemental conditions. Drafted in longhand, just like my old operational addenda back at Meridian when I needed to process every single clause without a glowing screen distracting me. My main demands: complete routing control over every single assigned freight run. Weekly payouts for our completed shipping deliveries instead of waiting 30 days. Plus a formal clause requiring Crossfreight to fully evaluate my trucking company for a long-term partnership with equal standing once our success rate cleared 85%. No guarantees needed. You and I know the rejected Underdog often holds the cards tomorrow. I quietly checked on my daughter Bonnie before heading to bed. I stood in her doorway just listening to her breathe, then went to sleep. Our first week of deployment moved fast. First thing Monday morning, I gave Giselle live access to our tracking dashboard. I walked her through the dashboard in a 10-minute call, then climbed behind the wheel for the first run before 7 a.m. I drove that northern corridor myself, not because my hired drivers couldn't handle the job, but because I had to personally verify local road conditions and weight limits. And I needed to secure those delivery points myself before sending my guys out there. I flagged 3 specific intersections where the GPS routing was technically correct, but completely inefficient, and 2 loading docks running operations completely different from their officially posted instructions. I even caught a stretch of county road showing heavy surface wear, bad enough to delay a loaded semi by 15 minutes every single pass. I logged those details into the logistics file before even heading home. By day 3, I flagged 2 key spots in the delivery manifest where corporate planning completely missed real-world constraints. A bridge with weight limits that legally disqualified their fully loaded trucks, and a city delivery zone where oversized commercial vehicles were heavily restricted during daytime hours. I quietly drafted a brief report offering 2 alternative shipping routes for each bottleneck, detailing timing and fuel costs. Calculations for both, firing the options over to Giselle before 12 p.m. She immediately forwarded it to Evelyn with just 1 line attached. He found what our supply chain team missed in 6 weeks. Evelyn reviewed my report twice, pulled up the fleet tracking dashboard, and simply watched those 11 truck indicators crawl across the screen, sitting in complete silence. Giselle knew exactly what that silence meant. After 4 years together, it meant Evelyn was completely rethinking what she thought she already knew. On day 8, Evelyn drove out to my 17th freight delivery stop. She convinced herself it was just an operational check, the standard oversight any logistics CEO performs on a massive contract. She parked her car down the street, watching quietly from afar. There I was, standing beside my rig, calmly talking with the receiving manager, reviewing the cargo manifest and making a quick note on my clipboard. There was absolutely nothing flashy about what she was seeing. It was just the pure, undeniable image of a professional operator doing his job. That drama-free competence was my ultimate answer to her past rejections. She couldn't stop thinking about it. Now stick with me here. On day 12, Carter Baines targeted my fleet. He had isolated 2 of my best drivers through a shady mutual contact. Within the regional freight network, Baines arranged for them to get highly lucrative offers, heavy signing bonuses and higher pay rates, demanding they ditch my company immediately. It was a calculated, precise disruption. Losing 2 truckers mid-contract would easily force me to compress my shipping schedule, triggering massive cascade delays across the northern and central corridors, and handing Baines the exact performance failure he desperately needed for the board. But real leadership builds loyalty. One driver rejected the recruiter before the pitch even finished. The second driver brought that sabotage letter straight to me the very next morning. I read the threat, thanked my guy, and made just 2 calls before lunch. I dialed up 2 old friends I hadn't actually spoken to in 3 years. Former Meridian colleagues who had moved to the region to run their own independent routes. Both of those guys instantly recognized my number flashing on their phone screens. Both of them agreed to help before I even finished asking. By day 15, I met Evelyn at Isaac's Diner with my 2-week progress report. I formatted the 4-page document myself, cleanly tracking logistics completion rates across every single corridor. I clearly flagged 2 recurring access delays at specific cargo sites. And I included a tight projection model for the final 2 weeks, assuming bad weather. Evelyn studied it in that corner booth while Isaac refilled her coffee without even asking. You see the pattern here? She admitted it was the most detailed report she'd seen in 7 years running the company. She finally asked again. She asked where I learned to write fleet documentation that was so incredibly precise. I reminded her she already had my resume. She finally looked up from the page. I watched her with the quiet confidence of a man who no longer needed her approval. And then she found it. She could not look me in the eyes. That is the look of someone realizing they were dead wrong. On the 29th day, her assistant, Giselle, called Evelyn while she was driving. Carter Baines had just called for an emergency meeting with the board. His formal complaint claimed that Evelyn had violated corporate policy by handing core logistics operations over to an unvetted outsider like me. This was a direct breach of their shipping company's governance rules. Baines had quietly slipped that clause in 18 months ago, aiming to trap her exactly like this. The emergency board meeting was set for day 32, the very same day as our first major retail shipping deadline. That was no coincidence. His trap was brutally simple. You and I can see his trap. If my trucks hit the deadline, he would claim a violation. If my trucks missed the deadline, the failure would destroy her anyway. Either way, he had built a perfect trap to get her fired. Evelyn sat in a quiet gas station parking lot reading the email, finally feeling the crush of defeat. For the very first time in her career, she had absolutely no idea what to do. I called her at 11 that night. I already knew everything about the meeting. I had known since the day my driver brought me Bain's dirty offer letter, and I spent 2 solid weeks deciding exactly when I should bring it up. I told her straight out that I had a voice recording of Carter, his assistant, begging my driver to abandon our freight contract mid-run. It was a clear, documented act of sabotage against our active supply chain. I told her I could send the proof tonight. Evelyn asked why I had waited. I told her I kept it quiet until the job was completely done, ensuring absolutely no one in charge. Neither Baines nor the board could ever claim I used it as cheap leverage to protect my business. Results speak for themselves. I deliver first and handle the rest later. She sat in stunned silence on the other end, then softly said she understood. I sent the files to Giselle's secure email at 11:15, then checked the northern routes forecast. But the meteorologists were dead wrong. The storm that was supposed to hit Ohio whipped northwest instead, and by midnight on day 31, heavy snow hammered the upper section of my shipping route, 14 delivery locations. 2 of my trucks were already running late due to a warehouse dock delay. I sat in the cab of truck 11 and adjusted our schedule, calling every driver, shifting stops, and recalculating their tight arrival windows, all while my wipers fought against the freezing ice on the windshield. Isaac stayed on the line with me for 2 solid hours, reading live radar maps from his laptop while sitting at a diner counter. My fleet held the line. We bent, adjusted, and rerouted, but we stood strong. My daughter Bonnie called at 9, asking if I would be home to read her a bedtime story. Stick with me. I checked the odometer and the dark road ahead. I watched the storm roll east, leaving my last 4 delivery stops in the dust. I told Bonnie to keep her little stuffed toy awake for me. We made that final core delivery at 11:47 p.m. on day 31, just 13 minutes before our high-stakes fleet contract deadline expired. Our final completion rate for the entire project hit 93.2%, 8 points clear of failure. 4 points higher than what Evelyn demanded when she practically begged for help at my gate. I sat alone in the dark, empty lot for a few minutes, finally holding all the cards before starting the drive home. I called Giselle, passed along our final logistics numbers, and told her to hand them to Evelyn. Giselle said Evelyn was waiting desperately. Well, now she knows, I said, and quietly hung up. I pulled into my own driveway at 1 in the morning. Bonnie was fast asleep, her stuffed toy tucked tight, with her little bedside lamp still burning. She must have been reading to herself until she simply could not keep her eyes open. I turned off the lamp, watched her from the door, then walked out to the kitchen and collapsed at my desk. By 10 the next morning on day 32, Evelyn Cross marched into her corporate boardroom and took her usual seat at the head of the table. Carter Baines had set the room up to look like a formal trial, printed files at every chair and a screen displaying massive slides screaming governance and strict accountability across the screen. He started his pitch with the smug arrogance of a man who spent years laying a trap, watching his target finally fall inside. Evelyn calmly let him finish. Then she stood up. First, she revealed my unbeatable logistics data from the critical first phase. 93.2%, zero breach, a $12 million shipping deal completely secured by me. Second, she shared my secret recording and the written bribe, a paper trail proving without a doubt that a core board member intentionally tried to ruin a major contract just for his own personal gain. Third, she handed out my true elite corporate biography. Not the simple driver resume she filed away, but my massive real history of success. The degrees, my 12 years leading a massive logistics empire, the power. The undeniable truth that her firm once begged to work under me, and I was the one who rejected them. She spoke my real name loudly to a room of executives who just spent half an hour calling me a simple liability. And she dropped that truth bomb without a single apology. The vote intended to strip her of executive power suddenly flipped into the very vote that suspended Carter Baines immediately, starting a huge investigation into his corrupt actions. She won the board 7-2. Giselle stopped her in the hallway afterward, quietly asking when I actually sent that tape over. Evelyn told her it was last night. Giselle pointed out I could have sent it weeks ago, saving my own skin much earlier. Evelyn smiled. She knew I waited for the perfect moment to hand her the ultimate opportunity. She drove straight to my house that afternoon without even calling me first. Bonnie was playing out in the front yard, sitting on the grass, threading small beads onto a string with the sheer focus of someone running a major operation. Her stuffed animal sat by the fence, acting as the site supervisor. And there I sat on the porch, holding my coffee, the man who once was rejected, now holding all the power. Ever feel that quiet, steady calm? Of a man who built his entire life around the few things that actually matter. Evelyn walked straight through my front gate and sat beside me without saying a single word. She dropped a heavy folder right on the step between us. I stared at the folder, then right at her. A long-term partnership proposal, she called it, on completely equal terms. A 12-month renewable contract giving me first refusal on every major Midwest route. And any freight contracts over a specific volume. I finally picked it up, taking my time to read every single page. Then I reached page 3, looking at my own old handwritten list of demands. Now typed out in crisp print, fully baked into the contract. Looking up, I heard her claim she found my original draft in her files. I told her she only found half of it, written 18 months ago. She stared at me, looking exactly like someone forced to recalculate the entire history of how they had once easily dismissed you. Then, for the very first time since I ever saw her face anywhere, from that old magazine cover to the corporate boardroom, right here by my front yard fence, she finally smiled. Not that icy, calculated CEO glare she always wore to shut people out, something smaller, real, honest. The exact kind of smile that meant she had finally swallowed her pride, realizing she could no longer pretend she held the cards. My daughter Bonnie held up her little handmade bracelet, proudly announcing that it was finished, asking if the fancy lady was staying because her dad was cooking spaghetti, and my spaghetti is actually pretty famous around here. Look, 3 months later, my trucking company was running 16 rigs. The fleet grew, not because I chased expansion, but because 2 drivers I previously brought on during that brutal winter crunch practically begged to stay. I obliged. I hired 2 more local drivers to handle the volume from her freight deal. I still take the wheel for 1 shift every week, not because I have to. Honestly, I haven't had to do that since buying our 3rd truck, but because I firmly believe, with the stubbornness of a guy who paid dearly for his lessons. You and I both know a boss needs to feel what the job demands. I knew those back roads. I knew exactly where the way stations sat, where freezing weather buckled the highway, and which shipping docks crawled on Tuesdays. That real-world knowledge lived in my calloused hands, not just in some file cabinet. I had no interest in trading it for a cozy desk job checking dashboards. Evelyn completely overhauled her entire corporate freight board. Last winter, right after wrapping up the investigation into Carter Baines and his corrupt conduct. And sitting right on her new executive strategic advisory panel was me, Mason Holt. This wasn't some charity favor or a cheap extension of our partnership contract. She practically begged me because I was the only man whose blunt, honest advice she could trust without looking for a hidden agenda. See, I made a habit of telling that high-powered CEO exactly what she hated hearing. No sugarcoating, just hard truths, and she was finally forced to admit that. You and I both know real honesty is the rarest asset in any corporate boardroom. Picture this. On the first Monday in February, my little girl Bonnie wore a simple beaded bracelet to school. Blue, green, and yellow. We made it the day Evelyn finally had to hand over that long-term contract. Bonnie told her best friend during recess that a friend of mine actually helped her make it. When her classmate asked what this nice lady's name was, Bonnie just smiled and said Evelyn. The kid asked what she did. Bonnie just knew she worked with big trucks just like her dad. You and I know that no paperwork can capture real grit no matter how clean it looks. It doesn't show up in polished safety sheets or credit scores or trucking metrics, or how my dusty boots looked in her high-rise glass conference room. You see it when a driver answers the call when a major route freezes over at midnight. Or how many times I kept knocking on her locked door, knowing my trucks were reliable and my results spoke. Evelyn Cross spent 18 long months judging my operation from the outside, completely blind to its actual power. I knew our true worth from day one, so I kept grinding until she couldn't ignore the numbers. Eventually, she saw it. It took 7 brutal rejections and her own system failing to finally wake her up. And the man she constantly dismissed. I was still sitting right there, holding the key because I never gave up. I just took the hard road, building my empire and delivering every single time. Keeping the lane open, because we both know the underdog always gets the last laugh.